Isn't it wonderful to have Barbara Kingsolver back in Kentucky attending the Kentucky Book Festival? She's the author of 10 best-selling books of fiction and nonfiction. Her fiction work includes, of course, you know those, The Lacuna, The Poisonwood Bible, Animal Dreams, and how many of you read along with me at KET when All Kentucky reads the same book, The Bean Trees? As well as books of poetry and creative writing. Her work of narrative nonfiction includes the influential bestseller Animal, Vegetable, Miracle, A Year of Food Life. She's been awarded the National Humanities Medal, our country's highest honor for service through the arts, and she lives with her family in Appalachia. Transylvania University, by the way, is our sponsor for this event, and we thank them very much for their sponsorship. They are sponsoring a nearby neighbor, or a used-to-be neighbor of Jan Isenhour, our conversant with Barbara this afternoon. She is the retired executive director of the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, real close to Transylvania University. She's a University of Kentucky graduate. She still leads the Brown Bag book group at the Carnegie. Any members of that group here? Yeah, okay. And she did something really interesting that she might share with us this afternoon. During the pandemic, she began a series of what she terms micro-essays, as she wrote on Zoom with Kaboom, her writing group, exploring what happens as we come to terms with the joys of solitude, even as we are distanced from communities that sustain us. That sounds interesting, doesn't it? So I give you Barbara Kingsolver and Jan Isenhour.
Are we? We are. I think we're on.
This is my sound check. Everybody here okay? I have to give you a little more historical context. This is the third time I've had the pleasure of introducing Barbara Kingsolver. The first was back in the late 80s when you came to town just after The Bean Trees had been published, and she was a featured presenter at the Kentucky Women Writers Conference. And then about 7 years ago, you were inducted into the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame, sponsored by the Carnegie Center, and I had the pleasure of introducing you on that occasion. And so here we are today. These feel like a set of steps we've been climbing, and every so often we get this nice plateau. And so today's one of those. I know that all of you have not had a lot of time for reading this wonderful book because it's a newborn. It just was released on October 18th. So how about a little bit of setup for us? Tell us what this wonderful book is about.
Well, I will, but before that, I'm gonna reveal even more of our history, which is that we're cousins by marriage. So we've known each other forever.
Since she was 10, but I didn't want to embarrass her.
And so every family reunion, Jan and I pull chairs over to the corner and talk about what we're reading. And so I just thought, what fun to have that conversation, here.
Right.
It feels like a family reunion.
You have lots of family over here.
I do. Look at that. It is. Whenever I'm back in Kentucky, I feel like I'm with family. So this book, Demon Copperhead, which is a newborn, in fact, came out last Tuesday, is my attempt to tell a story that has been worrying me for over a decade. I live now in southwestern Virginia, which is, culturally not too different from here, not too far from here. And we were, our part of southern Appalachia was really one of 3 places in the country that was chosen as vulnerable by Big Pharma to be what turned out to be ground zero of the opioid epidemic. So there's been, a lot of the kind of the big players in that story have gotten a lot of airplay. There have been lawsuits. We know now really what Big Pharma did, and how they lied, and how these drugs came into our region and became a force of catastrophe, really. So much addiction. Where I live, every family I know has lost someone to overdose. So it's become just sort of this story on the national and international level of good guys, bad guys, lawsuits, and so forth. But where I live, what we see is the kids, the orphans. It's estimated in some of the counties around where I live that 30 to 40% of kids are growing up without parents. They're being raised by someone other than their parents because their parents are incarcerated or addicted or dead, and so our social networks are stretched very, very thin. I just thought for about 2 years, how can I tell the story of these kids? It's very dark. It's very sad and hard. And you're my readers. I love you. I don't want to punish you. It's hard to tell such a dark and painful story. So I thought, and I was not it was like a house that I couldn't break in. Well, I don't break into houses, excuse me. I couldn't find the key to properly unlock the door until I had a conversation with Charles Dickens.
That's the origin story of this novel, and I think it's worth hearing. You might have told it once or twice already, but it's really charming and also a little
eerie.
Creepy.
Well,
Yeah,
it's Halloween after all. It's a ghost story. Okay, I'm just going to ask, who's heard the story? Okay, not everybody. I don't want to be like Uncle Harold that tells the same story, But here's what happened. Okay, I was really frustrated. How can I tell the story of these kids, these orphans, these thrown away children? And I was at the end of a book tour in the UK, and I was at the end of my rope. Those are the same thing. You get really, really tired, kind of foggy. And I had a weekend before flying home, and just on a whim, I booked myself into a bed and breakfast called Bleak House that is really Bleak House. Stephen, my husband, had flown over to join me, so I said, hey, guess what? We're going to go spend the night in Charles Dickens's house. So, he was game, and we thought, how Dickensy could it be, really? After all, it's been 150 years since he lived there. Well, it was real Dickensy. It was this mansion, this brick, sort of creaky old brick mansion on the edge of a cliff, overlooking Viking Bay, the ocean, in Broadstairs, and it was a dark and stormy night, and we knocked on. It really was. It was sleeting. It was November. Knocked on the door. The door opens, and there's Bob Cratchit at the desk. And this tiny little woman who literally was limping came to get our luggage. So there's little Dorrit. And we were, of course, the only people in the place. And so they gave us the run of the place. And so we went upstairs to Charles Dickens's bedroom, and Stephen went to bed. And I was just drawn to Dickens's study. There it was at the end of the hall with these bay windows. And this desk, Charles's desk, it's the place where he wrote David Copperfield. And I just felt just like an electricity from this room. I just sat and I put my head on that desk and I just said, tell me what to do. And he did. I just felt this vibe, this powerful outrage, and I was thinking, well, of course, orphans were his bailiwick. This is what he did. David Copperfield is his story. It's his favorite of his novels because it tells the story of sort of all the different anguishes, all the different miseries of structural poverty and kids in Victorian England, and they didn't want to hear it either. I'm sure the polite Victorians did not want to hear it, but he told them, and he gave him a good story. And here's what he said. And I could tell you that I heard his voice say, "You let the child tell the story." And so I did. I mean, it just came to me in a flash that I would write my own David Copperfield set in southern Appalachia, and Copperhead just came right to me. I saw this kid with red hair, and I started writing the book that night on that desk.
So it ends up being a coming-of-age story. And we all know about the coming-of-age stories. Tell me what it felt like to write a coming-of-age story for someone who is so different in gender, in age, in economic and social circumstance than you are. How does a writer tell that story? There's some thinking in the world of publishing that a writer should stay in her own lane. She should not venture to tell the story of someone so different than she is. How did you do that? Because I think you're going to pretty quickly hear that Demon Copperhead's voice is a really strong, distinctive voice.
Well, thank you. Well, representation is a really important question, and it's one that every writer thinks about a lot. It has the whole question of who's allowed to write about whom has changed a lot over my career. And I can tell you that when I was starting out 30 years ago, women were still kind of we were raising the position that possibly women who have spent our whole lives reading about women written by men, that maybe women could do that too. Because, I mean, and I'm not kidding, because, I mean, some of you, I'm sure many of you remember the days when you went in a bookstore and there was literature, which was, John Updike and Norman Mailer and Shakespeare, whoever. Charles Dickens. And then there was women's literature, which would be perhaps Alice Walker and Virginia Woolf. It was like a subset, and no men, of course, would read that. But so I've been really gratified to watch this whole question, come around and come of age. It can be taken too far. I mean, if one were to insist that novelists could only write about ourselves, we would have nothing but autobiography, and my friends, that would be a sad world. It's an act. Fiction is an act of imagination. So there are various reasons why we have to cross some boundaries. A good story is made of conflict, right? Conflict comes from characters who have different positions, different worldviews, different backgrounds. Who's allowed to write that? So, you have to be able to conjure characters. The way I decided to handle it years ago is to make firm boundaries in point of view. So a character who's from a very different ethnicity or background from mine, who's had a life I really cannot know, I will represent from using the dramatic point of view, right? So I will describe them. For example, when I wanted to write a novel set in the Congo, I've been in the Congo. I know, I've known Congolese people. I've had Congolese friends. I know what they look like, what they say, how they dress, what they cook for dinner. I can tell you all that, but I will never go inside that character and represent him or her from the inside. It seems like a safe place for me. And so to tell that story of the Poisonwood Bible, I brought four little white girls from the South, into that story so that they could tell it to you through their eyes, and that seemed like the way I could do it. So generally speaking, I respect those boundaries. I crossed it this time. I decided to write this. Well, I didn't decide. I was instructed to tell this story from the first person point of view of a teenage boy. Well, by the time he's telling the story, he considers himself, an old man. He's like in his late 20s by then. He starts with chapter 1, I am born. First of all, I got myself born, he says. So So this voice, I didn't give a minute's thought to I guess because I was given such eerie permission, I didn't spend any time worrying that I wasn't allowed to tell you the story through Demon's Eyes. I just worked really hard to make it authentic. I have known, I've raised children. I've spent a lot of time around teenage boys. I've spent a lot. I've heard a lot of language. That language. Those appetites. It's an advantage, right, to being a mother and a writer. You know children of every age, right? So the challenges with Demon were to get his vernacular and his heart in the right place, and he's old before his years. He's wise beyond his years. To give him credit, there were a couple of fundamental things that I did to kind of soften that voice in successive drafts, because I tell you, the first draft he was mad as hell. He was dropping F-bombs on the first page. And actually, I got to about page 200 of a first draft, and I thought, just curious, I'll do a search. How many F-bombs? 175.
Oh, that's a lot.
So, yeah. So I realized I needed to dial him back, not just his language, but his anger. Because while he has every right to be angry, he's been thrown away by his whole society. But again, I don't want to punish my readers. You have to love him to follow him in this journey. So to make him likable, I eased back on his anger, and I also did some manipulation of his. Well, we can also talk about not like F-bomb language, but vernacular.
I was curious about that, because I noticed in the afterword you said how all your years outside Appalachia had tried to shame a certain language from your tongue. And I thought about that, how authentic the vernacular hits the ear when you read this book.
Well, that's my first language. I grew up saying I'm tarred, and and our English teacher would say, and feathered. So, that I know his language. I grew up among people who spoke it that way. But this is, I'm also conscious of representing Appalachia and countering the persistent stereotypes and condescension that our region meets anytime we're represented at all in national media. If we show up at all in entertainment or news or anything, it's either as the dumb hillbilly or a poverty documentary. So it's a really important part of my project to show the rest of the world who we are with nuance, that we're not one kind of character, we're whole ecosystems of characters. But also we have this language that we shouldn't be ashamed of. And so, but that too, I had to dial back. Now, I don't misspell words, what I call Uncle Remus language, misspelled words to show a dialect. I find that very condescending, and I can't read it and I can't write it. So the trick is to use idioms, to use habits of speech, and also to ease the reader in gently. I was careful not to. There are certain trigger words like I reckon. The minute a character says I reckon, I mean, if it's you all, it's probably okay. But if it's somebody from outside of here, they put a straw hat on that character and a moonshine jug. Holler is another one of those words. Where I live, we say I reckon all the time, and we say I live up in that holler, and all kinds of other things. But to be careful about introducing that language gradually, so that you respect this character's intelligence and or whatever he is, before you hear his full-on he'll speak.
Thanks. That's great. I know from the pre-publicity and from the jacket cover that not only is there a giveaway about the David Copperfield connection, but there's also a giveaway to the opioid crisis and the importance of that that current challenge in the book. And many of you may have read Dope Sick. Many of you may have seen the Hulu series, which is a bit different than the nonfiction version. I'm curious about how this fictional account of the opioid crisis can add to that conversation that was present in Dope Sick, in the nonfiction book. What does fiction do that nonfiction struggles to do?
That's such a good question. And I love that question, and the answer is why I do what I do, why I do fiction, why I love fiction so much. I have immense respect for Beth Macy and all the other journalists who've done so much work to bring, the story of what Purdue Pharma did to light. And Beth is a friend of mine, and also Dr. Art Van Zee, who is featured. He's not the Michael Keaton character, he's the other doctor. I actually resisted watching the series for a while because I know the people, and I didn't want to see them played by, anyway, there's that disturbing aspect. But I do recommend the series. I think it's great. I'm so glad that journalists do what they do. What a novel can do is take you inside of another person's brain. No journalist can do that. Movies can't do that. You're watching them from the outside. What I wanted to do with this novel is move you inside this boy's life so that you know his pain firsthand. You feel, when you read a novel, you put your own life down on the bedside table, right? And you just go inside other people. So to feel, not just to watch, for example, the trajectory of someone who has a sports injury, gets these pills from his doctor, who's told, take these stay ahead of the pain, take these. And then what it feels like when you when you get to the end of that bottle and you literally feel like you're going to die, and you every bone in your body aches, and you just to feel, I know now I promised you I wouldn't punish you, but I do get you there. So you feel what it's like. And I think that's going to give you a different kind of empathy, which I think is, the answer to a whole lot of problems. But, after 50 years of the so-called war on drugs, we've all been brainwashed to look at addiction as this matter of choice. Like, these people made bad choices, they're doing bad things, we shouldn't put them in prison, which doesn't solve anything. So to sort of give you an inside feeling of what this disease is, and so that you might feel more sympathy for solutions that are more useful. To treat this as a disease, we wouldn't say, to our daughter who has cancer, well, I'm kicking you out, and you have to hit bottom, and then I'll get you to treatment. It's just because you have a weak character, you got this cancer. Yeah, so fiction is a huge project in building empathy.
Great. Would this be a good time to read, maybe, after you get your sip of water? Would you like to hear a little portion? Yeah, I want you to have that voice in your head so that when you go home, you'll want to do nothing more than open the book and start reading.
Can I open your book? It's a big old book to carry. I've been living out of a suitcase for a couple of weeks, and this is a quarter of a suitcase right here. So I figured anywhere I am, I'll probably be able to borrow one of these. So
it's not quite as long as David Copperfield, for those of you who are thinking about a paired reading here.
It isn't. There were some chapters I left out. We had a chat about that, Charles and me. But you might remember, if you read David Copperfield, the one thing for sure you remember is how it begins. Chapter 1, I am born. So this is Demon Copperhead's chapter 1. First, I got myself born. A decent crowd was on hand to watch, and they've always given me that much. The worst of the job was up to me, my mother being, let's just say, out of it. On any other day, they'd have seen her outside on the deck of her trailer home, good neighbors taking notice, pestering the tit of trouble as they will. All through the dog breath air of late summer and fall, cast an eye up the mountain, and there she'd be, little bleach blonde, smoking her Pall Malls, hanging on that railing like she's captain of her ship up there, and now might be the hour it's going down. This is an 18-year-old girl we're discussing, all on her own and as pregnant as it gets. The day she failed to show, it fell to Nance Peggott to go bang on the door, barge inside, and find her passed out on the bathroom floor with her junk all over the place and me already coming out. A slick, fish-colored hostage picking up grit from the vinyl tile, worming and shoving around because I'm still inside the sack that babies float in pre-real life. Mr. Peggott was outside, idling his truck, headed for evening service, probably thinking about how much of his life he'd spent waiting on women. His wife would have told him the Jesusing could hold on a minute. First, she needed to go see if the little pregnant gal had got herself liquored up again. Mrs. Peggott, being a lady that doesn't beat around the bushes and, if need be, will tell Christ Jesus to sit tight and keep his pretty hair on. She came back out yelling for him to call 911 because a poor child is in the bathroom trying to punch himself out of a bag. Like a little blue prize fighter. Those are the words she'd use later on, being not at all shy to discuss the worst day of my mom's life. And if that's how I came across to the first people to lay eyes on me, I'll take it. To me, that says I had a fighting chance. Long odds, yes, I know. If a mother is lying in her own piss and pill bottles while they're slapping the kid she's shunted out, telling him to look alive, likely the bastard is doomed. Kid born to the junkie is a junkie. He'll grow up to be everything you don't want to know. The rotten teeth and dead zone eyes, the nuisance of locking up your tools in the garage so they don't walk off, the rent by the week motel squatting well back from the scenic highway. This kid, if he wanted a shot at the finer things, should have got himself delivered to some rich or smart or Christian non-using type of mother. Anybody will tell you the born of this world are marked from the get-out, win or lose. Me, though, I was a born sucker for the superhero rescue. Did that line of work even exist in our trailer home universe? Had they all quit Smallville and gone looking for bigger action? Save or be saved, these are questions. You want to think it's not over till the last page.
So the writers in the audience may be wondering if you have some tips for managing a book that ends up being 550 pages long.
Oh, mercy.
Deal with all those words in the process.
Well, I mean, in practical terms, I thank the heavens for my computer. I write everything on a computer. I actually laid this out. I started with an Excel file. And I put, because David Copperfield, well, first I had to reread it. It had been a while since I read it, and I thought, is this really going to work? And I started getting tips right away, like in the first or second paragraph when David Copperfield says, whether or not I am to be the hero of my own life, it remains to be seen. I just thought, superheroes, teenage boy, Marvel, DC. I just started seeing how well this was going to work. Granted, there were some blind alleys that I don't think, frankly, Charles even needed. But we talked about it, but I laid it out there were 66 chapters in David Copperfield, and I put in each cell like a sentence, what happens, and then below it, I mean, after I got those 66 chapters put in, I started translating what's going to happen in my version. What will this character be named in my version? It just tracked so nicely. And it was a master class, honestly, in Dickens, which I've been a Dickens fan for a really long time. I actually have a sibling here who can attest that when I was probably 9, I wrote a puppet teleplay, and we tried to we made puppets to do a Christmas Carol. Christmas Carol. I thought that was the funniest. It was so funny. You know, it's like when Marley, you know, he has that cloth wrapped around his head. He comes in to tell his message, and he unwraps the cloth, and then his jaw falls off and hits the floor. It's like I think that was my first experience of being enraptured by Dickens. So anyway, I've been a fan for a long time, and a fan of his magical plots, but tracking, you know, so carefully, I saw his tricks. 8-page chapters. The average chapter length in this book is 8 pages. That's a trick. You know, when you're in bed and you're reading and you say, only 6 more pages, I can finish this, right? You're all nodding. Okay. And then here's the thing, on page like 6.5, you put in a little hook. So that's going to say, okay, well, I'll start the next one. So these just the sort of very straightforward, you know, I just call them tricks. Devices like that helped him move the story forward, and so I did the same. Another thing I noticed was how he manages coincidences. He has this cadence in which characters disappear and come back. Just when you're starting to wonder, well, I have that Rose with the you know, when is she coming back? And then she does, just a minute before you've forgotten about her altogether. So I just followed his advice all the way through, and it was really fun and really hard. Both of those things, which for me is just catnip, to transpose, you know, a Victorian setting, a Victorian child labor. Like, for example, Victorian child labor would be in shoeblack factories or these schools where they really put boys to work. Well, the modern equivalent of that is a child labor that a lot of us probably experienced or know very well, is tobacco work. So I invented instead of a school for indigent boys, which is what Dickens had, I had a foster home where the foster it's this struggling tobacco farm where the man, they call him Old Creaky, gets foster boys. So that they'll come and do his free labor in the tobacco field. And this is real. This really happens. So things like that were just really a fun challenge to sort it all out. So have I answered the question? I wrote you don't even want to know, like a 700-page first draft. And then with each successive draft, and there were many, I set concrete goals. I'm gonna remove 15% of the pages this time, and then again and again.
I read that there's 75 characters in David Copperfield, so you've eliminated some of those prototypes as well.
Some, but I bet you I have 60. There are a lot.
Yeah.
There are a lot, and probably, you know, even in terms of principal characters, there are probably 25 because of all the boys swap out and Tommy and Steerforth. That was another fun thing, the names.
You have a lot of fun with the names.
I had a lot of fun with the names. Yeah, so Steerforth, who's the I would say a sociopath, right? I mean, is that fair
Yeah.
to say? The dangerous friend in David Copperfield. In my version, he's a high school quarterback, high school football star, and his name is Fast Forward. The real puzzler was Uriah Heep. I have a Uriah Heep, and I puzzled and puzzled. Well, a heap is a pile, right? And piles is a pretty common last name. And so what's a you name? He's the guy. He's this kind of slimy character who's the assistant coach, and he hauls all the football equipment around. So I called him U-Haul. So he's U-Haul Piles.
And then the coming of age story has sort of built in a plot trajectory for you, so that you start out at the birth of the hero or heroine, and with any luck you see them through to adulthood and watch as they face challenges on the way. And that can be said in any time. Any era has its challenges.
It does, and I did feel that, one of and I can call it brilliant because, as you know now, it wasn't my idea. The brilliance of the first-person narrative for this very difficult, dark, scary coming-of-age story is that he's telling the story, so he's gonna. And Lee Smith, the wonderful Lee Smith, is a dear friend, and I gave her an early draft, and she said, I was scared to death. I didn't think he was going to make it. I couldn't sleep. I was so worried about this little boy. But then I thought, he's telling the story. He's gonna live.
So I have two short questions, and then maybe we'll turn it over to the audience. The first one is, have you had any time to read? I think we all like to know what authors are reading, what books moved you, inspired you, have captured your attention. Do you have any recommendations for us?
Oh, well, we're at the family reunion.
Yeah.
This is what we do. Well, because I've been on book tour, which is, on an airplane every day, it's kind of, I won't even say what it is. I read Less is Lost. I don't know if you've read the wonderful Andrew Sean Greer's Less. Well, this is a sequel, and it's a great road book, and he's a wonderful writer. So I just finished Less is Lost, and I read the new Maggie O'Farrell, which is called The Marriage Portrait, because I loved Hamnet so much. You're all nodding. So I'm not giving you any big surprises here. Right now I'm reading sort of when you need a reliable book, you turn to the author who has never let you down. So those authors for me would be Louise Erdrich. Well, I always go Tharn. I go deer in the headlights because there's so many authors I want to recommend. What else? I could write you a long, long list.
Good. Well, you can give it to me, and I'll pass it along.
Okay, that's what I'll do.
This first question from the audience goes along with what I wanted to talk about, and it's about Animal Vegetable Miracle. And I want to say that for those of us who follow you on Instagram, it's like seeing season 2 of Animal Vegetable Miracle, because you spend so much time on your Instagram posts tracking your family's commitment to eating local, growing your own food, putting your own food up. And I just wanted you to talk about that ongoing commitment and how you all find time for that.
Well, it doesn't feel like a commitment to us. It just feels like how we live. It's kind of like, going to church. It's just what you do in your life that feels like the right way to live and makes you feel good. And I also, we live on a farm, and it's a working farm, and we grow lots of our food, and we grow food for other people too. We have sheep, we have chickens, and the sheep are for fiber and meat, and we just have a huge vegetable garden. And every year we say, well, we'll make it smaller this year, and we don't. So yeah, you know how that goes. And if you want to see, you can follow me on Instagram. I just post the pictures because they're so beautiful. Vegetables are beautiful. And I guess the reason I sort of resist saying it's a commitment, it's less of a commitment as just a happy way of life, is that local food is one of the few areas of virtuous living that's actually more enjoyable rather than less. So we do it because it tastes good, and also I like living on a farm and doing farm work because it's a good physical balance to the work of my days happens all in my brain, and it's could forget, I sit at my desk for like 10, 12 hours forgetting that I have a body, and then I wake up and I do, and every part of it hurts. So it's very healthy, I think, to get out and pull weeds or pull lambs or whatever needs to be done.
So that being said, how did the pawpaw meringue pie turn out?
Delicious.
It's really beautiful. You didn't bring me a piece.
You wait.
Okay, here's a question. Can you talk about the cool nicknames in the book? What does it mean for male culture? And you've alluded to the fact that the nicknames are drawn a little bit, or they're contemporary spin-offs of some of Dickens' names.
They are. All the characters in this book, a lot of the characters go by nicknames, especially the males, which is an Appalachian thing. It's so interesting. I just kind of grew up with it without thinking about it, but now as an adult, it's funny that all guys get a nickname, and they are rarely, shall we say, flattering. They're like stumpy, stubby, stinky, funny. The guy who, when I was growing up, the guy who fixed our washing machine was named Funny. And he wasn't especially. But, and it's like, that's what people go by. That is the name they're known by. So that in the obituaries, when you read the paper, the obituaries, it's Emmett Stinky Blevins can be viewed at the funeral home. And so that actually was helpful in my project of using, because of course Dickens' names are wonderful. And so it helped me to kind of keep the sort of capture the character of these names in my modern characters.
All right, I'm going to blow your cover on one of the names. Maddie Kate Guthrie worked for your father for 17 years. Is it a coincidence that her name is used in the book?
It's a little honor. Maddie Kate is this wonderful caretaking. It's just, that's a little, I never base characters on real people, and people always assume that you are, or they used to assume that all the characters were me. But after 17 books, I guess they figure I can't be all those people. I have not done all those things. I used to say, no, I did not find my baby in a car. She was much harder to produce, etc. So no, I don't use real people. It doesn't serve my purpose. My project is to start with a theme, create a plot, invent a plot that will tell the story I need to tell, and then cast it with characters who will do exactly what I want them to do. So, it's sort of like being a psychologist in reverse. You start with the actions, and then you back up and give them damage, or whatever it is they need that will motivate them to have the loves and the passions and the fears that they have in your story. So real people wouldn't work. The real people I know aren't that cooperative. I have to be completely in control. So that being said, once in a while I will drop in a name just as a little, I don't know, it's like a penny in a wishing well, or it's a little grace note to someone who's meant a lot to me in my life. And yes, somebody here knew Maddie Kate Guthrie.
They spotted the Easter egg in the book.
Yeah.
Is there a passage you've written that made you particularly proud or sad or satisfied that you'd gotten it just right? which speaks, I think, a little bit to revision and how you know when to stop and all those things.
Well, that's the answer, is all of them. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't stop until every single sentence is exactly it feels exactly right to me. And that comes from lots and lots of revision. I love revision. It's my favorite part. Writing a first draft is just hard work. I have a friend who says, I would rather clean restrooms in a bus station than write a first draft. And kind of. I would more liken it to like pulling weeds. Just like I'm going to pull all the weeds out of this row of beans. It's just you just slog and slog and slog, and then you get to the end. Then the fun begins, because then you get to go back to the beginning and just tilt everything. You know the end, and so you're going to tilt all the mirrors so they point just right. You take the ending and you hint at it all the way back. It's just so much fun. That's where the art really happens, and it happens slowly with many, many, many revisions. By the time you have that book in your hand, every sentence in there has been rewritten between 5 and 30 times, every sentence, because none of them is right the first time. Once in a while, once in a blue moon, right? You write a sentence and you say, whoa, thanks. Move on. But almost all of it can be improved. Everything can be improved. And usually for me, that means cutting. As I said, I started with a 700-page manuscript, and you should be glad I got it down to the 500-something that it is. But what that means is it's tight. There's nothing extra. There were sentences I was sad to lose, but you didn't need them. Everything. It's like, what they used to say, well, I've heard people say about sculpture. You start with a slab of marble and you chip away everything that doesn't look like the David. This is what you do with fiction. You start with a blob and then you pull out everything that isn't perfect. And then you adjust your verbs. You take out all the adverbs. Maybe allow yourself like 3 in the whole book. So just that the goal is for every sentence to be just the one I wanted. And then when it's finished, I put it away and I never look at it again. Right? Because why would I read my own book?
I'm a little in the dark about this question. I had an advanced reader copy that came out this summer, so I don't know about the letter at the beginning of the book. But this writer says, I'm from a mountainous northern Appalachian town in the Berkshires, and we're dealing with the same challenges related to the opioid crisis. Why did you feel it was important to write a letter contextualizing what's happening?
Because my publisher required me to do that for a particular edition. Most of the books don't have that, but that's just a publishing thing. They do special editions for, like, there's often a Barnes & Noble special edition. There's often a first editions club, and they ask for a little extra material. And so I just write these letters giving just a little bit of the background. Not very different from what I'm doing for you here today, but these are people that won't be able to come to, the Lexington Book Fair or whatever. So it's just a little something extra. So because I can't sign books anymore because I have a hand condition that doesn't allow it, and so there was a lot of pressure to do like other kinds of value added. So I gave them recipes. I wrote Mrs. Peggett's cornbread and beans. That's what I did. So there's always, in the industry, there's always this push for, it's not enough that you wrote a book. Give us something more.
Thanks. While we're on the subject of publishers, I'm wondering, publishers often tell people that 75,000 words, maybe 100,000 words, a book about 300 pages long is about right. Do you think there's more of an appetite now for longer books? And if so, why, or did you just get a dispensation to go with the story, do you think?
You know, after I've been with the same publisher for 17 books. I've been with the same publisher for 36 years. And I know that because I got my first publishing contract with Harper back when I think it was Harper Brothers back then. I don't know what they did with the other brother, but anyway, my first contract for my first novel, the same day I had my first child. So my life changed in a very big way. It took me a while to notice, honestly. But after all this time, and I've had really, in all that time, only 2 editors. I've had the same editor since about High Tide in Tucson, whenever that was, decades. So at this point, I just say, I'm writing a book, and they say, good, get back to us. It's really, I've always had, I have a lot of writer friends who just, really have a lot of complaints about their agents or their publishers. I'm just very lucky that my publisher has, from the early days, I had a fierce agent who was very protective of my, I guess, worldview, which is not always popular. I've never, she said, don't worry about being marketable. Just write about the things that keep you awake at night, and let me handle the rest. And I'm so lucky because she cleared the way. She was like a snowplow. She was a ferocious woman with purple hair and lightning on her shoulder, and she was just a mother and a savior to me. And she really, from the beginning of my career, said, don't worry about what people want to hear. Worry about what you have to say. And I feel like that's the best advice. And it's not advice that I think writers get very often. But I'm very lucky that that has always been my motto. Because if I think about my exact position in the universe, what I've experienced, what I've seen, what I know, what I don't know, what I'm worried about, that's, in this whole sea of books that there are in the world, my only shot at adding something new and maybe interesting is to pay attention to that, to this, my particular, catbird seat, and sing from that spot.
We are so glad that you chose this vocation and that you chose to come here and share it with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And on behalf of Kentucky Humanities and the Kentucky Book Festival, thank you all for coming. And just wanted to let you know that the book festival is still going on until 5 o'clock, so you still can go spend some more money and support the humanities. And thank you so much, Jan and Barbara.